Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Thank you very much. Well, good morning, Hofstra. Oh, it's a better morning than that. Good morning, Hofstra. All right. First, to President Rabinowitz, it's a pleasure to be back. What a gentleman, that president. Do you know that he's offered 5 points extra credit to every student who attended today? Let's give him a round of applause, President Rabinowitz. Hofstra is a great university. I've had the pleasure of dealing with it many times over the years. And the president's right. Last time I was here was the great debate, the great gubernatorial debate. I remember it like it was yesterday. I learned one thing in that debate: the rent is too damn high. I don't really know who did better coming off that debate. Jimmy McMillan made hundreds of thousands of dollars. I inherited a $10 billion deficit. But pleasure to be with you again, Mr. President. Thank you for this forum. And let me just put an exclamation point in what the President said about the necessity of forums like this and what you do in presidential debates and political debates across the board. Because this really is about you. It's the old adage. But this is your future we're talking about. And for you to participate in the debate is everything. And that's actually the message that I'm going to bring you today fundamentally, is that we need you to engage in this dialogue and this process if we're going to make a difference. So, President Rabinowitz, thank you once again for hosting today. All my colleagues, we were together just yesterday. We were in Albany together. It's a pleasure to be with them. Assemblyman McKevitt, thank you very much for the hospitality, and thank you for the kind words, and thank you for being here. Robert Megna, Budget Director is a thankless task. It really is. You can't make everybody happy. It's especially thankless when you're broke. So he's had a very difficult job because we are broke, and he's done a great, great job. Let's give him a round of applause. And we are going to talk to you about the state budget today. And I prepared a few slides to show you. I've been in office for about 1 month. It has, however, been a very long month. I didn't have any of this gray hair when I started a month ago. I didn't have these bags. I wasn't this pale. This is all a product of the last month. I was elected with 3 goals. First, to clean up Albany, to make it work for the people, to give you a government that you were proud of, to end the corruption, to end the scandals. That was the first goal. Second, to balance the budget. We're going to be talking about that, to bring fiscal discipline to the state of New York. Why? To get the economy running again. Not that fiscal discipline is an accounting exercise. It's about getting the economy running and creating jobs. Jobs, jobs, jobs. That's the third goal. The President was right. The state is at a crossroads. The decisions we make today will define the future of the state for years to come. I am sure of that. And with that in mind, we started with a different type of budget plan. This is not just about the numbers. It's about the values. It's about the choices that we're going to make. The first, seemingly simple point, but it is profound, is we spend too much money. That is my educated economic analysis. We spend too much money. And we spend too much money by every indicator. When you look at the average rate of spending over the past 10 years per year, 5.7% more the state spends every year. The state only takes in 3.8%, the tax receipts or the revenues to the state. So you're spending 5.7, you're making, if you will, 3.8. Personal income growth is the income growth of the families in the state is 3.7. And this is all double the rate of inflation. This, my friends, is clearly unsustainable. It's that very simple economic rule: you can't spend more than you make. And this says clearly that the state of New York has been spending more than we've been bringing in, and it's been doing it for the past 10 years. Because we spend so much, we have to tax so much, right? Because when you are increasing spending, you have to get it from somewhere, and it comes, that's why the taxes in New York are so high. $4,800 is New York's per capita spending. in state and local tax burden, 66% above the U.S. average. It is the worst among all the states. When you put the property taxes on top of it, which you know especially on Long Island, $3,700 is the median New York property tax bill in the state. It's much, much higher here. And $3,700 as the average is 96% higher than the U.S. average. And this starts the negative cycle, which is bringing the state to the plight it's in. Businesses leave, people follow the businesses, there's then less revenue in the state, you have to raise taxes even higher, causing more businesses to leave, more people to follow. 2 million people have left the state of New York. Well, you could argue, look, we spend a lot of money, but we have great services. You could argue that. You would be wrong, but you could argue that. The truth is, we spend a lot of money, and we don't get performance. We spend more money than any state in the nation in education. We're number 34 in terms of performance. We're number 1 in spending in Medicaid. We're number 21 in performance. We spend $1.6 billion annually in economic development, and we are dead last. Well, why does this happen? We understand we're spending too much. We're not getting performance. It's been going on too long. It's a vicious cycle. Why? Because when you pull back the curtain in Albany, what you find is that the special interests really control what's going on in the government. That is the heart of this problem. That's what Bob Megna was referring to. This is not a budget problem. It's not a numbers problem. It's a corruption with a small c problem. It's special interests controlling the government and the government operating for the benefit of the special interests rather than the people of the state of New York. That's really the problem we face. And that is the pervasive problem. You see that in terms of the budget, you see that in terms of ethics, you see that in terms of campaign finance reform. That's the pervasive problem, and that's what we have to solve. In terms of applying it to the Albany budgeting, we call it Albany meets Enron when it comes to budgeting. And this is a sham, the way Albany does its budget. I spent 4 years as Attorney General. I spent 4 years researching and disclosing industry scams, right? Health industry scams, where the health industry was really setting their own reimbursement rates. I did it on Wall Street, which was manipulating the housing market and the values of houses. I did it in terms of student loans, where the banks were manipulating the student loan market. This is the same type of thing. I'm not Attorney General, I'm Governor, but it is the special interests controlling their own industries. That's what's been going on in Albany. In one statement, slightly tedious, the budget is driven by rates and formulas that are in the law of the state that give certain groups and industries unsustainable annual increases. And this has been developing for years, my friends. The rates that are put in the laws are often by the influence of special interests and their lobbyists that dominate Albany. So, for example, 2 big programs in the state that drive the cost of the Medicaid spending and the education spending. In the state budget, it defines what the rate of increase will be for the next year, okay? So they just passed a budget last year, and everybody understands the economic circumstances that were in place last year. What do you think the law says, our law, the great state of New York, the law says is the increased inflation rate, the increase in spending for Medicaid and education? You would think, well, maybe it's the rate of inflation, normal indicator, which would be about 2%. Maybe it's 4%, maybe it's 5%, 6, 7. 13% increase in Medicaid, 13% increase in education. You ask yourself, how is that possible? And when you look at the increases that the state has been having over the past years, 16% last year for Medicaid, 14% the year before that, future years, another 13% for next year and 9% the year after. Education, the same thing, 13% next year, 11% the year after. Nothing is increasing by these amounts. Not inflation, not income, not savings. Is anyone's bank account going up 13%? Anyone's home value going up 13%? Anyone getting 13% in an interest account? No. Only government thinks it's going to increase the spending 13% at a time when the revenues aren't going up at a third of that amount. That's the cycle that the state is in. The rates of growth are unsustainable, they're unnecessary, and it is the permanent government. The special interest I refer to as the permanent government. There was a book written on the permanent government by a fellow named Jack Newfield, God rest his soul. He was a great reporter and author. He wrote a book on the permanent government that made the point that a lot of what goes on in government isn't about the political differences. It's not Democrats, Republicans. It's the special interests that are infused in the government. I've been in Albany for a month as governor. I was in Albany once before, many, many years ago, with another governor named Mario Cuomo. And I went up as special assistant when my father was elected in 1982, and I spent some time in Albany. I go back now, about 30 years later, the same people, the same lobbyists, in the same hallways, standing in the same places, the same corporate interests, making the same arguments. It's not Democrats, Republicans, it's not that political schism that's driving. It is the special interests and the powerful interests that really control the government year after year after year, through the campaign finance system, through donations. But that's what this is all about. And that's what we're trying to get at. More egregious to me is that you have these tremendous rate of increases and government spending, but it actually has no connection whatsoever to performance for the people. You know, it'd be one thing if they said, well, we're increasing Medicaid spending and education spending, but it's linked to the people. It's linked to patients and wellness and success rates. It's linked to student achievement and to student graduation rates. It's not. It's all about getting more money to the special interests. Even the way they describe it is misleading. Now, they project a 13% increase. Anything that is less than a 13% increase is referred to as a quote-unquote cutting the budget, all right? So if the increase is 13% and I propose reducing the 3%, that's a cut, right? Even the way they describe the budget is misleading to the public. So anything that is different than the 13% growth is actually a cut. All of this now comes to a crisis. This has been going on for a lot of years. Now it's a crisis because you put this kind of budgeting on top of a downturn in the economy, and it becomes unsustainable. What do we need to do? We need to redesign the programs for performance, make the programs work. We need to recalibrate our spending to a sustainable level, and we need to rebuild the economy to create jobs, because that's what really the entire exercise is all about. When you look at the Medicaid program, which is again one of the big two programs in the state, we have a redesign team working now to redesign the program. Redesign the approach, redesign the incentives, make it about the patient. It's a $50 billion program. They're in the midst of that redesign now. To give you an idea of the kinds of redesigns they're going to do, the fastest growing area in Medicaid is something called home health care, which was a good idea. Rather than putting people in nursing homes, you leave them in their own home and you send the care to them in their home. And this is the fastest growing area. Per recipient spending has increased 89% from 2003 to 2009. The way the program works is the state contracts with the first agency called the Certified Home Health Agency. That agency takes 25 cents on the dollar for administrative overhead. That agency contracts with another agency called a Licensed Home Care Service Agency. That agency takes 25 cents on the dollar. That agency then actually hires a person to go into the home to provide the care. That leaves less than 50 cents on the dollar, 50 cents on the dollar, all to administrative overhead before anything has gone to the patient. That kind of waste and abuse and inefficiency has to stop and has to be taken out of the programs. To recalibrate in the meantime, Medicaid last year was a $53 billion program. We're going to reduce the funding to $52.8 billion. It is a 2% decline in Medicaid funds. When you look at the growth of Medicaid, even with the 2% cut, the growth in Medicaid is 5.7% per year compared to inflation, which is 2.3, so it's more than double the rate of inflation. Going forward, we have to recalibrate the growth in Medicaid. It's now projected to be 13%. We can't afford a 13% increase in Medicaid next year. We'll recalibrate it to what's called the health care CPI, Consumer Price Index, which is 4% annually. Same basic approach with education. First, we want to redesign the program. We want to make it about performance. We want to fund performance. Right now, we fund education by formula grants, block grants to a school district. You get the same amount of money from the state whether you do a great job or whether you do a terrible job. Whatever you do, you get that same amount of money. We want it to be about performance. We want it to be about incentives. So reward performance, acknowledge performance. And we'll have two funds, one $250 million grant program for school districts that achieve measurable gains in student performance. Increase the student performance. You'll win a grant. We'll recognize the school district. We'll recognize the teachers. We'll find out what they're doing that works so the other school districts can actually emulate it. We'll also have a grant program for the best managed school districts. What school districts are finding ways to save money? And let's reward good managers who are actually finding efficiency. In terms of recalibrating the spending, right now we spend about $52.9 billion on education. We're going to reduce the state spending $1.5 billion, which is 7% of the state aid, but when you combine it with the local funding levels, on average, it's a 2.9% increase. You'll hear talk, it's in the paper today, well, if you cut education funding at all, we're going to have to lay off teachers. That's always the great fear. I consider it a threat. If you cut any aid to education, we're going to lay off teachers. Yeah, you could do that, but that would be unnecessary and would actually hurt teachers and it would actually hurt the quality of education. Or you can better manage the system, right? Or you can find, on average if it's a 2.7 reduction, find efficiencies within the system. For example, the state has funded reserves in school districts all across the state. Reserves are basically rainy day reserves that school districts keep for when they may have an issue. The schools have about $1.2 billion in reserves. There's an additional $600 million in federal money from last year that they didn't spend. That's $1.8 billion. The entire state reduction is 1.5. So there's more in reserves and unspent federal money than the state reduction of this year. Maybe we look at the compensation for the management and the administration of the school district. I used this example a few days ago. School superintendents did not like it, but it is still a fact. Some school superintendents earn more than $300,000 per year. 40% of the school superintendents receive a salary that is $200,000 or higher. Maybe we look at a wage freeze. If we freeze increases for management and teachers, that savings would be $1.1 billion a year in and of itself. Employee health contributions. If the teachers paid the same health contributions as state employees, my employees, $500, $600 million in savings. Or talking about consolidating school districts and finding management efficiencies. But the point is, we have to find efficiencies in managing the system and managing government better. You know, every family and every business has had to adapt to the pressures in the economy. Everyone has. Everyone has found savings. Everyone has had to tighten their belt. Even government now is going to have to tighten its belt. And that's really the point for the school districts. They have had record increases over the past 10 years. Record. We believe in education, and we've been funding education. And the overhead has been going up, and the bureaucracy has been going up, and the salaries have been going up. Well, we can't afford those increases going forward. We need to recalibrate, and we need them to better manage the system. Going forward, we'll recalibrate the spending. Again, we can't afford 13% increases, but we propose an increase of tied to the personal income growth rate at about 4%. In what's called state operations, we're going to review all the state agencies. We're going to come up with a comprehensive reorganization plan. We are going to do the same thing that we're preaching that local governments do and school districts do. We're going to find $450 million in savings among state agencies, working with the workforce, wages and compensation, looking at pensions and health benefits that have become unaffordable. Last resort, the state would have to lay off 9,800 people if it couldn't find the savings. Two places where we expect to find savings and reductions. First, the state's correctional facilities, prisons. The state built many prisons over the years. Why? Because there's a demographic wave, and at one time there were a lot of people committing crimes, and that age group, young males, was very high, and we built many prisons. The good news is the number of people in prisons has dropped. Part of it is better crime fighting, part of it is that demographic curve. But we have about 14,000 fewer people in prisons, which is about a 20% decline since 1999, which means we need fewer prison cells, and we can consolidate prisons to save money. That's one of the areas we're going to be looking at. One of the other areas is the state juvenile justice system, which needs reform anyway. The state juvenile justice system works this way. Juveniles who are found to have committed a crime are sent to juvenile justice facilities that are state-run. They're often in upstate New York. They are very, very expensive to operate, about $250,000 per young person per year, $250,000. The program and the treatment they receive, if anything, in my opinion, is counterproductive. The recidivism rate for a young person who goes to a juvenile justice facility, which is effectively a prison, is 90%. 90%. So you're spending $250,000 of taxpayers' money to keep a person in a facility that, because of the surroundings, the environment, the treatment, there's a 90% recidivism rate. You are doing something wrong anyway. And there's tremendous data that shows community-based programs that keeps the person close to the community with support services is much cheaper and has a much better effective rate. That's what we're going to do. We want to move away from these state juvenile justice facilities, reduce the population in those facilities, save the taxpayer money, and better treat young people. And third, we're going to focus on rebuilding the economy, because that's what this is all about anyway. At the end of the day, you're not going to make this state's finances work by cutting. Why? Because we're an expensive state to operate. Our Medicaid costs are expensive. Our education costs are expensive. We believe in a high level of service, and we need a high level of service. What we need to do is grow our way out of this problem. We need more jobs. We need more revenue. We need more people working and paying taxes. So it's about growth, the way it's about growth here on Long Island and growth upstate and growth in New York. So it's a government that is actually focused on bringing businesses into this city, into this state, into our counties, rather than putting up barriers that push them away. I spent 8 years in Washington under Bill Clinton. I was the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, which was basically an economic development agency. And I worked all across the United States doing economic development. The only economic development approaches that work are economic development approaches that realize there is no one state economy. There are regional economies. There is a Long Island economy. There is a North Country economy. There's a Western New York economy. There's a Hudson Valley economy. And to really make the economy work, you have to do it region by region, and it has to be bottom up all across the state. And that is a dramatic change for this state's thinking, but it's a change that we're going to be implementing now. We have 10 regional councils. The councils will be higher ed driven. They're about public-private sector partnerships. They're about a single point of contact in that area. All the local governments, all the state government is together in one council to actually get things done. And we're going to run all the economic development money through those councils. Crossroads, as the President said, this point will make, I believe, determine the future of the state. One road is the road to ruin, and one road is the road to recovery. I believe this puts the state on the road to recovery. This is also a dramatic change for the state. It is a fundamental change for the way the government operates and the people who have been controlling the government for many, many years. And first of all, change is hard. Change is a funny concept. You know, everybody says they're in favor of change in every situation. We need change. We need change. They'll say it in the classroom. We need change. They say it in relationships. Husbands and wives say it every morning. We need change. We need change. What people are really saying is, you need to change. They don't want to say it that way, but that's what they're really saying. You need to change. For ourselves, you know, we're butting up against perfection. We don't really need to change. The other person needs to change. Change is hard. You know, we want control. The last thing we really want is change. So it's hard on a personal level. It's hard in a small relationship. It's hard in a classroom. When you get to a situation like changing the state government in Albany, $137 billion budget with all those special interests who've been there for years, that level of change is very, very hard. So I don't underestimate it at all. But I also know change comes when the planets line up. Change comes when you have a crisis that is forcing change. It's true in personal life. It's true as a collective. This is the moment for this state to change. This is the moment where we are in a crisis. There are two roads. We are at a crossroads. And we either figure it out and we change, or this is going to be a different kind of state. It is that fundamental. And fundamentally, if we actually get this done, and if we make this change and we come out the other side, we will have stopped unsustainable spending. We will have closed this year's deficit. We will have stopped next year's deficit from happening. We will have done it with no new taxes, no gimmicks, no borrowing, no phony stuff. We will have started to redesign these programs to actually work for the people once again and have performance funding. We'll have started this state on a track of real economic growth. We can reposition the state where we can say to businesses, we're not anti-business, we're not the tax capital, you don't have to leave, come back. We get it. This is a different orientation in this state, and this state is open for business. We can do that this year. We can launch this state on the road to recovery. But here is the point that I'm going to end with that the President started with. It takes you. It takes you. Who's going to make these changes? Who starts it? You're going to do it. Well, you're the governor. You're supposed to do it. No. I am one person. And if you listen to what I said the day of the debate, my whole campaign, I said, this is not about me. This is about we. It's not about one person. It's about the people of the state of New York deciding that this state has to take a different path. That's when change comes. You know the power of the governor? The power of the governor comes from the people. The power of the governor is when the people are galvanized behind the governor. That's when the governor has power. And that's all it is. Otherwise, I go to Albany and I look at all those special interests who've been there for all those years and I say, we're going to change. And they said, we're not going to change. We're going to change governors. That's what they said. This is a lot of money and this is a lot of power. People will say, well, how did Albany get so bad? How did it get so bad? How did it happen so fast? It didn't happen so fast. It happened over a lot of years. It happened because there was apathy. It happened because people got disappointed. It happened because there was complacency. It happened because the people allowed it to happen. And it will stop when you force it to stop. Change starts with the person in the mirror. Not the person to the left, not the person to the right, the person in the mirror. When you say enough is enough, it will change. Politicians have excellent hearing. They do. They hear what people are saying. It's a natural selection. Politicians who don't hear what the people are saying are not politicians for long. It's an extrapolation on the Darwin theory. Go ask your professor. When the people speak, the politicians will follow. But you have to speak, and you have to act. And that's why President Rabinowitz says we do the debates and we do the forum. These are real issues. It does make a difference. These decisions are going to shape the state. And your voice can make that difference. Democracy works when you make it work. And when you don't, someone else or some other force fills the void. And that's where we are today. If you do what you have to do, and if you get engaged and you make your voice heard, you will see this state change. And as your governor, if I have you behind me, we're going to make this state not just the Empire State that it was. We'll take this state to a level it's never been to before. The fundamental obligation, the fundamental responsibility as a parent, as a citizen, is to leave this place better than we found it. Government is a phenomenal vehicle to help do that. And that's what this is all about. How do we make this state a better state for our families and for our children? This budget, this moment, this time, this direction is going to chart that course. Be part of it. Make it happen. Together we will. Thank you and God bless you.